In 1987, an alien assassin invaded the cinematic universe and merged the action, science fiction, and horror genres together like nothing before. Assisted by the stardom of its leading male, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Predator was #1 at the US box office in its opening weekend. Fans demanded a sequel, and in 1990 they got just that with Predator 2. However, the film's hero was replaced by Danny Glover, and the movie suffered as a result, only managing 4th at the US box office in its opening weekend. Despite this, the film's end sequence teased an expansive universe where stories of aliens versus predators could be told. Although neither film received critical acclaim, they both gained cult status, attracting devoted fans to the series who demanded more. And more is exactly what we got, with a plethora of comics, novels, and video games that expanded the lore of the Yautja and fascinated us further. However, we would have to wait 14 years before finally seeing what Predator 2 promised on the big screen. Unfortunately, when we finally got what we had been anticipating, it did not meet the hype and most fans were left massively disappointed. Since 2004, we have had a string of standalone and crossover Predator films that have mostly received mixed or outright negative reviews. The more recent attempts have often failed to impress film critics, devoted fans, and even regular audiences. Some fans have embraced Dan Trachtenberg's new direction and have enjoyed the movies. However, other more traditional fans, much like myself, have remained unimpressed with where the series is headed. With this in mind, one must ask the question, where did it all start to go wrong for the Predator cinematic universe? Before I begin, I want to make it clear that I will not be focusing on how these films were flawed as movies, but more so on how they represented the Predators themselves. I will be exploring how the portrayal of the Yautja in these films contributed to the negative snowball effect that has led them to where they are today as characters. Now, I'm not saying that everything about these films are negative. I actually like at least one element of every Predator film ever made, and I'm going to make a video on that soon. However, in this video, I will only be giving my opinion at what I thought were the negative aspects of these films. I have always maintained that the first 2 Predator films are the only ones that I genuinely enjoy. For me, they complement each other perfectly and clearly belong to the same universe. Therefore, to fully understand where things went wrong for the films, I will need to begin this investigation in chronological order with 2004's AVP. Set on the freezing Bouvet Island, AVP introduced 3 unblooded Yautja who were on their initiation hunt. This was the first film that began the deviation from the classic aesthetic of the Predator character, with these bulkier, heavily armoured individuals with longer dreadlock appendages. As a result, these hunters seemed less graceful and agile in their movements, a theme that has continued to the more recent films. Worse yet, Scar was made to look more human, particularly in the eyes, perhaps so that he could communicate more obviously through facial expressions when collaborating with Alexa Woods. Unfortunately, this did not achieve the desired effect, and I remember that this moment was met with laughs at the cinema. A far cry from the monster reveal in the first movie. The Yautja and human collaboration presented further problems as it made the film's monster appear too friendly. This team-up worked well in the comics for die-hard fans, but did not translate well to film. In fact, the whole film seemed to dial down the scares and the gore, making the film more audience-friendly. It was the first Predator or Alien film not to be issued with the 18 certificate. However, AVP's greatest issue was that it made the Predators look weak as they were killed by aliens very early on. Only 1 Predator dies at the end of the first film. Only 1 Predator dies at the end of the sequel. 3 die in AVP, and 2 of those occur in the first act. I actually remember watching this film in the cinema with a friend at the time, who turned around to me and said, "I thought Predators were supposed to be strong." He was a regular filmgoer who looked at me as the so-called Predator fan for answers. In his mind, the Predators were losing badly, and he did not understand why. All regular filmgoers are seeing are 3 Predators fighting aliens and ultimately losing. Even Scar needed the help of Lex when battling the alien queen. This film's greatest crime was making our monsters look friendly and weak. In 2007, the sequel to AVP, titled AVPR, seemed to serve as an apology to the Yautja fans, and it flipped the script, making the Predator look strong and the aliens weak. It also restored the violence and gore, but perhaps overdid it in the process. The elite Yautja known as Wolf actually repaired a lot of the damage done to the Yautja's rep in the previous movie. If AVP's 3 unblooded Yautja were easily defeated by the Xenomorphs, this hunter took on multiple aliens single-handedly, proving to be the ultimate badass. But even he could not save the film. Ironically, this film's Predator was not the issue, as the problem was with the film itself. Despite having such a formidable Predator, this film's protagonists were not seasoned police lieutenants or army majors, but pizza delivery boys and waitresses. These poorly written human characters were not developed or relatable, and we did not care whether they lived or died. With a weak plot, terrible lighting, and two-dimensional characters, AVPR was such a bad film that regular audiences started to lose interest in the series. They perhaps felt that the Predator cheapened or weakened the critically acclaimed Alien franchise, ultimately taking it down with it. Perhaps AVPR's greatest crime was that it firmly established Predator films as trashy B-movies that were good for nothing more than a few cheap thrills on a Friday night. Despite AVPR's poor reviews, it did not kill the Predator franchise, and only 3 years later we had the third standalone Predator movie called Predators. Much like AVP, this film introduced 3 hunters, but this time they were not unblooded, they were bad bloods. This was a concept that the devoted fans became familiar with in the comic books throughout the early 90s. However, this was the first time regular filmgoers saw such merciless hunters on the big screen. The previous films had established an honor code where Yautja would not kill the defenseless, children, or sickly. However, the predators in this film were not bound by such laws and killed indiscriminately. However, in doing so, the character lost an essential part of what made it so popular with the fans in the first place. Without honor, these movie monsters were just like any other monster, mindless killers. They had lost their unique selling point. This is another unfortunate characteristic that has continued into subsequent films. Much like AVP, this film continued to stray from the original creature design and did so more drastically with this new subspecies called super predators. A larger, leaner type of Yautja that actually did not look all that different. However, did these changes actually enhance the character in any way? Personally, I preferred Stan Winston's original design and do not think that this new design added anything, but to the contrary, made the creatures look worse. Furthermore, these so-called super predators did not seem that super, as 3 of them combined could not defeat a random selection of warriors from Earth. Again, with all 3 predators dying, the Yautja were made to look weak. Matters were only compounded when you consider that these hunters lost on home turf as they kidnapped these people and placed them on the game-preserved planet, which should have given the Yautja the advantage. Yet they still lost. The 4th Predator film was the hugely disappointing Shane Black attempt called The Predator, and I think most of us agree that this was a catastrophic failure. This movie introduced yet another type of Yautja in the upgrade, which continued with the bigger is better concept with the largest hunter yet. At this size, you really start to lose perspective with the Yautja and human characters. This was a problem Ang Lee's 15-foot Hulk faced in 2003. Later films had to remedy the issue by making the Hulk significantly shorter. The upgrade, or assassin predator, was quite literally a predator on steroids, but despite all its genetic enhancements, it could still not slay all the human protagonists, which included an autistic child. Ultimately, the upgrade was destroyed at the end of the movie, which again only made the Yautja look weak. If the so-called largest and most powerful upgraded version of these hunters cannot survive a movie, then what hope is there for the rest? Aside from changing the classic appearance of the Predator, this movie also altered their lore. Any diehard fan of the franchise knows that the Yautja are a proud race of hunters who consider any tampering of their DNA as monstrosities, as was seen in numerous comics as well as AVPR. However, this film introduced the idea that the Predator were taking the DNA of their most formidable prey in order to enhance their own. This could be seen with the fugitive who possessed human-like hair for his dreadlock appendages. Unfortunately, most average filmgoers will not know about the Yautja's strict gene pool and will ultimately think that predators hunt people to further develop their own genetics. Therefore, the anthropomorphism of Yautja from AVP continued with this film. Additionally, the fugitive confused matters further when he was supposed to be helping humanity but spent most of his time attacking people instead. So much of this film made little sense. However, to make matters worse, a comedic tone was injected into the film which only served to make a mockery of the Yautja and the film as a whole. Gone was the horror aspect of The Predator, as the genre seemed to morph into action science fiction comedy. Ultimately, this film was an absolute joke. 2022's Prey was Dan Trachtenberg's first Predator movie, and he made massive strides in putting some respect back into the franchise. He actually made a good film where people took Predator seriously again. However, it was not without its issues. Yet again, we were introduced to another subspecies of Yautja that was from a specific area of Yautja Prime. As a result, we saw another massive deviation from the classic Predator look with the thinner, longer dreadlocks, strange-looking head, and goofy eyes. For me, these changes only diminished Stan Winston's original design. Perhaps the most notable change was the augmented muscularity of this individual, which again continued with the trend of bulking up the once lean Yautja. Despite all its might, this individual still perished at the end of the movie when battling a rather small lady in one-on-one combat. As I have said many times before, I do not think any single person should be able to kill a Yautja unless it is massively injured during the events of the film, like when the city hunter lost its arm, for instance. However, the feral was in pretty good shape until it fought Naru. I would have been able to accept this if she only used traps and ingenuity to slay the beast. However, she jumped on its back and wrestled it, dove between its legs with spinning attacks, tore off one of its mandibles, etc. Ultimately, if this elite hunter cannot win a one-on-one battle with a small person, then again it reduces the predator's deadliness and makes them look feeble. Finally, Prey continued to retcon previously established lore like the flintlock pistol, which irritated die-hard fans. As a result, this further eradicated the idea of the honor code, where Yautja would reward quarry for their victories. In Predator 2, the pistol is given to Harrigan for his victory, and in the comic 1718, it is given to Greyback by Raphael Adolini, who gifted it to the Yautja for helping him with a mutiny. This may sound pedantic and trivial, but without the concept of rewarding your opponents for an honourable battle, the Predators are just mindless and indiscriminate killers. This year, we had our first animated Yautja movie with Killer of Killers, which was met with many positive reviews. I personally enjoyed the first two stories of the anthology, and it was certainly a much better attempt than some of the more recent live-action versions. However, it was not without its problems. Killer of Killers has continued the theme of changing the classic Predator design, with the pilot Predator and Grendel King looking very different. Moreover, the obsession with increased Yautja sizes continued as we saw some of the most massive individuals. Now, this is okay if they successfully kill their quarry, but they didn't. Despite their size and technological advantages, they all perished against their human opponents. Therefore again, the Yautja have been made to look inferior as hunters. This film also seemed to forgo the honor code with a vengeance, as instead of rewarding survivors, they abducted them and forced them to fight one another on an alien planet. Killer of Killers, Prey, The Predator, and Predators have all done a lot to make audiences forget that the Yautja once had an honor code. Much like 2010's Predators, this film gave the Yautja home field advantage. However, despite their strength in numbers, size advantages, home terrain, and superior might and weaponry, the Predators could still not slay the captured humans. Again, this makes the Yautja look so inept as hunters. Finally, we move on towards the upcoming Predator Badlands, and from the trailers, I cannot say that I am hopeful. As it stands, they have continued to humanise the Yautja, which now has brown skin and a full hairline, with the dreadlock appendages worn in a fashionable style. As you can see, clear patterns have emerged which show the reasons why it has gone wrong for the Yautja we all once knew and loved. It is apparent to me that there are 4 main reasons for our distaste of the recent incarnations. They change the look of the Yautja to appear more human. They change the look of the Yautja with more hulking individuals. They abolish the idea of the honor code, making predators nothing more than mindless killers. They have made the Yautja look weak, either by dying at the end, losing on home turf, losing despite having strength in numbers, losing despite having superior size and/or weaponry. It is clear that I am only a fan of the Predator with the way it used to be. Today's Predator is not my Predator. When it comes to the films, the only individuals I actually count as true predators are the Jungle Hunter, the City Hunter, and Wolf. That is it. They can keep the rest. In my opinion, these are the only Yautja that looked and acted like actual predators and clearly belong to the same species and universe. I understand that this is a very negative video and I do not want to promote nothing but doom and gloom. As a result, I'll be making another video soon that actually looks at all the positives from each movie in the franchise. Please stay tuned for that and remember to like and subscribe if you'd like to subscribe. Until then, it's goodbye from me. Take care.